Thanks for coming. Good afternoon. I'd like to say special thanks to my running mate, Annette Meeks, whose input I value greatly. She's a great partner and will be instrumental in helping me with this very difficult task that our state faces in the coming years. And again, thank you all for coming. I hope you're all here filled with great anticipation about our budget announcement. I'm here filled with both hope and some frustration. I am frustrated, as are many Minnesotans, that politicians don't seem to understand the importance of living within our means. In fact, it's the frustration is enhanced by the fact that so many Minnesotans must live within their means. They're doing it right now. I'm frustrated that we have politicians who believe that the only answer for our state is to continue down a path which is unsustainable. You can come and hold it. I am frustrated that while government is going to get more than a 7% raise, many in government and those who feed off of government want more than double that amount, or they claim we'll be sacrificing too much. But I am also here with hope. Hope because voters understand what Annette and I understand. Government needs to chart a new path. The model of tax and spend government practiced for decades in this state will be over if I am blessed to be your governor. In our administration, working with both parties, we will reform and redesign government and set our state on the path to long-term sustainability. Our administration will not hand out IOUs like some states. We will not tolerate people saying it can't be done. The fact of the matter is, it can be done, and it must be done. Times are tough for most Minnesotans. People are afraid of their jobs. They worry about whether their kids will enjoy the same standard of living they have enjoyed themselves. We need a fundamentally new direction for state government in order to meet these new challenges and revitalize our state. Our state's people are living within their means. They are spending less money overall, and they are focusing their spending on essentials. I think that is exactly the way state government must behave. In the next biennium, state revenues are projected to increase by over 7% to an estimated total of nearly $33 billion. Let me say that again, $33 billion. We know state government can perform its necessary functions within the $33 billion it will have to spend over the next 2 years. I released the first two parts of our budget plan to highlight our top priorities earlier. Tax relief for hard-pressed Minnesota employers to reinvest and create new jobs. Holding public education harmless from cuts while pursuing reforms to improve student achievement. I want the public to know where our priorities are: creating jobs and improving education. Mark Dayton and Tom Horner have announced their budget priority: preserving the status quo in government. They are both members of the political class, and they think that raising taxes on hard-pressed Minnesotans is okay, rather than asking government to become more efficient. I believe all major spending areas of state government need reform. New spending priorities can be funded within existing budget categories, and that some areas of the budget will not be cut. Again, that includes K-12 education, but also public safety and our courts. At this point, let me review some of the key areas of our budget plan for reforming government. Number one, hold state spending in the next biennium to the projected tax collections minus job creation tax relief. Current state general fund spending is $30.7 billion. That does not include the $2.2 billion in additional one-time federal stimulus money. Minnesotans cannot shoulder the higher tax burdens which Mark Dayton and the other candidate propose. The only correct policy to solve Minnesota's jobs deficit is to provide employers with tax relief so they reinvest in their businesses and start hiring new workers again. With state tax collections projected to grow to $32.9 billion in the next biennium, we can help employers create new jobs, hold public education funding harmless, and maintain core services with broad reforms and without raising taxes. Next, we must reprioritize unsustainable, runaway human services spending to focus on the most vulnerable. Left unchecked, health and human services spending increases will destroy Minnesota's ability to fund schools, roads, public safety, and other core functions. We must refocus spending on programs for children and seniors, and we must work with legislators to reform programs for vulnerable adults. We can make the commitment to do this while holding the line on our state's investment in health and human services. We will limit growth to just over $650 million in the next biennium, and we will look for greater savings in the future through greater efficiencies and more reforms. Next, we must reform the relationship between state and local government. We have to reform local government aid to focus solely on public safety and critical infrastructure needs. Originally, local government aid was a means to help property tax poor communities meet critical needs like policing, fire protection, and sewer services. Over several decades, local government aid has expanded to an often politically targeted subsidy for some communities, and in the process has also paid for non-critical services. I believe that local government aid spending must meet its original purpose and go to those areas that really need it for critical services and infrastructure. We must also give local government relief from state mandates. Our administration will sit down immediately with the League of Minnesota Cities, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and the Association of Minnesota Counties to identify reforms that will alleviate unnecessary burdens on local units of government. We must also develop a plan to put state government bureaucracies on a diet. We must cut the bureaucracy and programs which are not fundamental to state government's mission. We must reduce the government workforce through attrition and early retirement, and we must merge agencies to streamline decision-making and reduce costs. My opponents have criticized me for not putting this out earlier. Timing, however, is not the most important measure of a balanced budget. Honesty is. I have produced a complete and, more importantly, an honest budget plan. Mark Dayton's so-called budget plan does not balance and has major omissions, like the fact that his $4 billion in tax increases will give Minnesota the highest income taxes in the country. Tom Horner's plan arguably has more detail, but he hides behind things called redesign teams and has vague goals to balance his budget plan. I challenge both of my colleagues to actually provide balanced budgets, and to do it soon so that voters have a chance to compare real budgets, not fluff. Mark Dayton, Tom Horner, where are your details? We have 3 candidates running, but only 2 financial paths to follow. The path the state and the country have been on, which Mark Dayton and the other candidate offer, or a path of economic vitality and fiscal sustainability, which we offer. With that, we'll take whatever questions you have. Thank you for being here.
Representative Emmer, was Carlson's endorsement of Tom Horner yesterday, did it say more about him or about the Republican Party?
The HHS looks like that's the area where you achieve the greatest amount of savings versus what the projected spending is. Can you go into a little more detail as to how you would shrink the amount by $2.25 billion over what was projected to be spent?
Actually, what we've done here, Brian, is we've given you the most detailed. These are target spending limits, so that government will live within its means. That's going to require working with both bodies of the legislature. I don't think that's necessarily what we're here to tell you today. We will live within our means. What are some of your
ideas as to how that spending can be?
You've heard some of them, but when we talk about reforms to Minnesota Care, when we've talked about changing the direction of general assistance medical care, but I think, again, we have to focus the efforts on the areas that I told you about. It needs to be focused on the most vulnerable in our communities, on children and seniors, and vulnerable adults.
What went into your decision-making to reduce higher education for fiscal year 2012-13 by $417 million?
Again, this is when you put together budget targets, you do it within your means, and what we're doing is trying to hold things as harmless as possible. But there are some issues with administration and such, administrative costs. This will be something that we'll work out details with the 2 legislative bodies, and frankly with the leadership of the university and Minsky.
Representative, am I reading this right that you would increase aids and credits in the next budget, or?
I don't think you read that right.
Okay, I see. So, but not by what, 400 million? How would you handle that? You say to make it more like it was originally meant to be, like
Right.
OGA was meant to be. How would you do that? Would that be immediate in the next, just, you'd have to pass it in the next legislature? How would you go about that? How would you reform this? Can you give us some more specifics there?
Well, I've given you some pretty good specifics. I mean, when you talk about local government aid, it was intended to provide communities that didn't have the economic ability to provide the number one obligation of government, which is public safety, sewer and water infrastructure, those types of things. That's where it needs to be focused. It needs to go back to its original intent. But this is going to be part of a bigger discussion that's not included in here, which you've heard me talk about when we start to talk about the system where right now state government collects all the money and then sprinkles it back to communities across the state. It's not working the way it was intended, nor is it working, we believe, in a fair and equitable manner. You really have to make sure that those communities that do not have the economic ability are able to provide the most essential core functions that state government should be providing.
So would you see some cities anyway losing all the LGA? Would you see most of them being cut? How do you see this actually playing out in the end?
I see it going categorically to police and fire services, to sewer and water infrastructure, to communities that actually exhibit the economic position that they need that type of help. That's what local government aid was for.
Would there be a formula similar to what there is now, or do you dump that?
Well, similar. The formula that exists now is frankly antiquated and has needed to be revisited for years. But again, the best I'll do for you today is local government aid needs to go back to those core government services: police protection, fire protection, sewer and water, other critical needs infrastructure for communities that didn't have the economic base to provide those core functions of government.
And would you provide some type of a tax, a way that cities and counties can increase taxes on their own?
No, I would not. No, I would not.
Following up on that, would you then deprive cities of the opportunity to use their own discretion in how they spend LGA? Would they have to spend it on those services you identified?
That's why I said categorical. That's what they would go for. But to say that we would deprive cities, we want to have a bigger discussion, Lori. We want to have a discussion about the way we collect taxes in this state right now. You know, when you have certain regional centers that are sending millions of dollars to the state, maybe seeing a quarter of it back, perhaps there's a better way of doing this, of identifying regional centers across this state, giving them more authority and coming up with a formula that allows them to keep more of their local tax dollars. And I'm not talking about local option sales tax, but more of their local tax dollars local, and give them responsibility over the decision-making that goes with allocation of those dollars.
Let me try the health question again. Do you envision fewer people being eligible for government programs, or the benefit sets being leaned up?
Again, this is what we're going to live within. How it ultimately looks, we've told you our priority is going to be children and seniors and vulnerable adults. That's where it needs to be addressed. Those details will be worked out with the legislative bodies.
So, Representative, how did you come up with the numbers, I mean, that you have here if you don't have the specifics to go into these budgets?
Well, Tom, I do have the specifics, and so do you. This has been the problem all along. We know what we have to spend. You have to, and this is the problem. We talk about deficits, but you only have a deficit if you're not willing to live within your means. You only have a deficit if you are committed to spending more than the state has to spend. We are telling you that we have set the most aggressive budget targets. We have also told you that one of our priorities is going to make sure that we work with both parties, because you've got the legislative body. We're not going to tell them that their ideas are not welcome here, but you must live within your means. In this case, we have shown you this is what can be done and will be done if we are in the office.
You said you'd hold K-12 education harmless.
Some of these battles that have played out in the legislature the past couple of years, certainly about HHS funding, about the LGA funding, higher education, you, obviously with these proposals, it would probably generate similar reactions, negative reactions from a lot of these groups. How do you expect that would play out if you would be in the office?
Well, when you say these groups, again, it's making sure that everybody understands that like Minnesota families, Minnesota businesses out there right now that are living within their means, many of them are not getting raises, many of them are losing their jobs, many of them are closing their doors because of tough economic times. A government should not be held harmless from that reality, that economic reality. In fact, government must look at itself. We must have the discussion about how do we provide services within the available revenues that we have. So, I don't think when you say there are different groups, I think most people do agree on that. Yes, there will be a different philosophy. There will be some people, I suppose, in the legislature and some special interests that think that health and human services must be allowed to grow over 30% every 2 years over the next course of undetermined time. That simply is not sustainable. These are the discussions that I think people on Main Street, Minnesota, are ready to have. Yes, we want to provide social safety nets, whether it be health, housing, food, whatever it is, for those that truly cannot care for themselves. But we also must look at how we are delivering these services, and we have to be conscious of the fact that if you're going to double just one agency's budget, more than double it, I mean, you're talking about the next 6 years, it will, in fact, eat up the entire budget, something like that, 6 to 8 years. That simply is not sustainable. And we're talking about being responsible, being accountable, putting government on a path to sustainability so it can do those things that people expect it to do without sending us into economic oblivion.
Representative Emmer, maybe I missed this right at the beginning, but did you have these numbers run by the Revenue Department?
Actually, the budget target numbers, if you will, Tom, those are ours. Those are mine, and that's the numbers that we verified were the current revenue projections, because obviously what we're talking about today is government's got to live within what it's got.
So they haven't done an actual analysis of this at this point, but these are the numbers?
Well, I mean, we verified we're spending $30.7 billion when you take out the $2.2 billion one-time stimulus funding. We verified that government will have $32.9 billion based on projected tax collections. The next governor and the next legislature will have that to spend. And what we've done is said, Minnesota, we are willing to step out and tell you, here is what we would do in these different categories. I think that's pretty detailed and pretty aggressive, and nobody else has done that.
So just to be clear, so we know the numbers that you're trying to get to. We just don't know exactly how you're going to get there.
Well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. The other way of saying it is we are respecting the process at the same time. You're going to have to live within your means. This is what we are proposing. If we're in the governor's office, obviously we will provide detail as to where we believe this should be, but we also want to make sure that leadership in both parties in the legislature understand that this is going to be a cooperative venture.
How would you expect to work with local governments that say that they've been cut to the bone already, as a lot of them say, and I'm sure that they would continue to say that under these proposals?
Well, yeah, some would, and some have a very valid argument because they've been very conservative in their budgeting. Their people, and there has to be one or more local units of government out there where nobody got a raise. Nobody's told me which ones, but there are many out there that actually have seen their employees get very good raises. And in this economy, that's a discussion we all got to have. We're in this together. We're going to get out of it together. Some don't get to benefit while others have to suffer. We all have to start looking at our own budgets. We got to live within our means, and we got to make sure that we put our economy back on track, which is creating jobs. Because without new jobs, without new jobs, creating new revenues, new tax collections, we're on a diminishing point of return anyway.
So is your argument that some local governments have been misspending their money and the claims of being cut to the bone don't hold water necessarily?
No, I don't think I said that. I think some have stronger arguments than others, but the reality is we've all got to sit down and have a discussion as a state. Look, you got to live within your means. State government has to live within its means. Local government, local units of government have to live within their means. Minnesotans and Minnesota businesses are doing just that. This is the time of greatest opportunity in the state of Minnesota, maybe even in the country. Yeah, difficult times, difficult economic times, difficult challenges that we all face. But it's a time of great opportunity. We can either choose to continue to do the things we're doing, Band-Aid a little bit here, Band-Aid a little bit over there, or we can make some difficult choices and start to say, look, What is the core function of government? What should government be doing, state level, county level, local level? Let's make sure those are funded, and let's make sure we start to redesign it so it delivers it in a more efficient way. Then, this is the part that the other guys leave out. You will generate new revenues if you once again make Minnesota the home of new investment and economic growth. That is where the ultimate balance comes, and you have to do this in order to get to the step that drives the economic engine of this state.
You're projecting, or you're planning for $2.25 billion less than what's projected for HHS. That's a pretty precise number. How did you come up with $2.25 billion?
Well, actually, I could have done it lower. And it's a great question, Pat. I could have done it lower, but I think part of this is as you go out and you try to explain to Minnesota where we're at and where we need to head, you know, there are going to be people, and maybe this gets back to the question that was asked earlier, there are going to be people that they aren't used to this type of thinking. And in order to get them to at least open themselves to the discussion, rather than come in with a lower number, what I did here is say, we're going to give a little bit more in the health and human services area. We're going to put a little bit more money in there so that you know we're not looking, we didn't come in here to say no government at all. We've been talking about better government, more efficient government. I don't want people to take a look at an area like health and human services and say, oh, look, Tom Emmer and Annette Meeks are going to just absolutely starve this agency to the bone. No, not at all. We need to have the real discussion, the open and honest discussion about we simply cannot sustain health and human services growth at the pace that it's at.
But what are the components of the $2.25 billion?
Pat, let me just back it again. Is when you talk about the over $2 billion increase, let Minnesota know what we're talking about. What they had planned this agency to grow by was over 32%, I think it is, 30% plus. That's not sustainable. If you're going to do that every 2 years over the next 6 years, you're talking about almost 100%. It's not going to work. That's the problem. So what goes into those components, we'll save that discussion. You know, we've set a very aggressive budget target. We'll save that discussion as we go forward with both of the legislative bodies. We have set an actual budget. This is more than anyone has ever done. In terms of you're running for office, what would you do with the state's budget? We have given you the detailed budget targets that we would do in every area. And we are open to discussing with Republicans and Democrats within those budget numbers, what would you do and how would you like to do this? Because the bottom line for this state and the next administration is government must start to live within its means. Government cannot simply spend what it wants to spend. It must spend what it has and no more, and you must create an economic environment that will once again start to grow state revenues.
Just one last point on this question. How did you come up with 2.25 rather than 1.75 or 1.62 or 2.1?
Well, I think I just told you. I mean, we could have done less in that area, certainly, and I chose not to.
So just to be clear, Representative, voters who go to the polls on November 2nd won't know whether or not you want to eliminate subsidized health insurance for low income who receive. I mean, I'm just trying to get some specifics here. You're saying, well, we're going to wait and talk about that, but are you going to offer any specifics on how you're going to, you know, reorganize HHS or reorganize higher education, or is that just going to be something that the voters have to, you know, trust you that number is going to be something?
I'm sure we'll be talking about some, but what I told you we would give you is what we gave you today. More detail than anybody has put out. We have given you every budget area, and we've given you to the dollar the budget, the line item budget numbers, the target, the spending targets that we would give to those areas. And again, you have to respect the process as well. And I think the message that Minnesota needs to understand is we travel this state, and as they go to the polls on November 2nd, is you have a choice. You can continue to see government grow at its current pace, its projected pace, which is simply not sustainable. Or you can start to look at what we're talking about, and we are again, which is why I've asked you. You wanted the detail. I have given you more detail than anybody else. I challenge the others, and if I'm wrong, great, then they'll march it out and show us. But I challenge them to provide the kind of detail now that we have. We've told you where we're going to be. But we also will respect the legislative process, because you got to live within your means, but you got to also work with people that are in the legislative process.
Representative, on the revenue end of your budget chart, you mentioned gaming revenue, none for balancing the budget. What are you open to gambling revenue for?
Well, if it's an economic development issue, if there's opportunity, I've said this before, and you've asked me for it specifically, Brian, and I think I sent it to you in writing even at one point. What I object to is first people using certain gaming numbers that aren't supported. I mean, I don't know where those numbers come from. Maybe you do. But more importantly, I just think legislators and government has made the mistake of, rather than addressing the hard question, what are our priorities? What is government supposed to be doing? How do we properly fund those priorities? What are you willing to tell Minnesota are your priorities, all right? And then make sure those are funded. What government seems to do is, rather than reform itself, it just keeps grasping for new streams of revenue, new taxes.
I guess what I'm asking is, do you have something in mind where you would want to use gambling revenue for?
No, I don't. But what I've done very purposely is said I don't just automatically say no to that. I just will not. I don't support trying to find a new revenue stream to fund an already bloated, oversized government without doing the necessary reforms.
Do you count on more or less federal money than the current budget?
I didn't include federal money in this budget.
Would you turn down more federal money that's been turned down in the past?
I mean, you're asking me a hypothetical. I don't know what will be available. I don't know under what terms it'll be sent to Minnesota. I mean, I think each one, and I made this clear, Don, each one, we would take a look at what it binds Minnesota to. What are the obligations that come with it? I mean, you don't automatically say no, but you absolutely, I think now more than ever, I think in the past, and this isn't a negative reflection on anyone, Republican or Democrat, the system has just evolved so that the states, and Minnesota just being one of them, have waited anxiously for whatever the federal government sends, and they can't wait to take it because it helps balance budgets that are always growing, but then they come with strings attached, which sometimes require future financial liabilities, and I think that's where it's really important for the next governor and the next legislature to always scrutinize, do the due diligence, if you will, every time a federal program comes. What does this obligate the state of Minnesota to in the future?
Do you foresee any public employee layoffs as a result of this budget proposal, this spending level?
No, what I said, Tom, and I think you're going to see it over the next 4 or 5 years, you guys probably have better numbers than I have, but we have a state workforce that has reached a certain age where you're going to see potentially significant attrition due to retirements, that sort of thing, and I think that's going to happen naturally.
Have you factored in at all with this HHS budget, whether or not this is going to jeopardize any federal money, just to follow up on Don's question?
Yeah, my understanding is it does not. But again, Tom, I'm not including federal money. We're just talking about the state's commitment in all these areas, so that people can see what we would do, what our commitment would be in these different areas.
Representative, how do you square with the critics that say K-12 education fund isn't harmless, is actually short of what would be needed next biennium?
Our commitment is actually going to put more in that was spent this biennium. So that's how I would respond.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
The
it.
endorsement yesterday, the Carlson's endorsement of Warner.
Thanks, guys.